My name is Bob Newton. I'm Special Assistant to Father Leahy, the President of Boston College, and I'm the Interim Director of the Church in the 21st Century Center. And I'm going to do two things very briefly. I'm going to tell you that today it was announced that we have a new director of the Church in the 21st Century Center. His name is Dr. Thomas Groom. He's been at Boston College for over 40 years. He's a professor in the School of Theology and Ministry. He's an internationally renowned theologian, a popular Catholic author, and an authority on religious education. Father Leahy appointed him today, and his appointment was announced in the BC Chronicle. The second thing I'm going to do is very quickly introduce the moderator for tonight's session. He's someone who hasn't been, I don't think, at Boston College as long as I have, but he's been here for a long time, and I don't think he's going anyplace. He's a person who, when I think of him, two words come to mind. The one is competence. He's the Director of Public Relations for Boston College and does a terrific job. And the other thing is commitment. I don't think you'll find or meet anyone at Boston College who is more committed to Boston College, and perhaps especially to the Jesuit and Catholic dimensions of the Boston College mission. So let me introduce Jack Dunn.
Thank you, Bob Newton, for those very kind words. And I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Bob for the wonderful job he has done in overseeing C21 for the past year. He has such great vision and energy, and coupled with Karen's enthusiasm, it's been a wonderful pairing. So thank you, Bob, for what you've done. And special thanks to Karen Kiefer, who, as I always say, makes faith accessible to all of us here on this campus. We're all in a debt. So let's hear it for Karen Kiefer as well. So welcome to our event, Finding God in Relationships, co-sponsored by C21 and the Office of Mission and Ministry. Tonight we'll hear from 4 members of the BC community who will share their experiences and how they encounter God in their relationships through work, vocation, marriage, and friendship. With us here are Brad Bates, who is the Director of Athletics at Boston College since 2012. Brad came to us from Miami University in Ohio, and previously he had worked in athletics at Vanderbilt, where he received his doctoral degree. Brad has a master's degree and his undergraduate degree from the University of Michigan, where he played football for legendary coach Bo Schembechler. As a walk-on student, earned a scholarship on the football team and distinguished himself on the highest of all possible stages. Mario Powell is a graduate of Boston College class of 2003. I have known him since he was a freshman here at BC High and is one of those alumni I respect most. He is currently studying for his licentiate in sacred theology at the School of Theology and Ministry here at Boston College, and has an MDiv degree from STM, which he received in 2014. Alicia Henchen is a clinical social worker at the Taylor Elementary School in Mattapan, and she is a graduate of Boston College's School of Theology and Ministry with a grad degree in she's a graduate of the School of Social Work with a degree, MSW degree, a Master's in Social Work. And Tim is a BC doctoral student, her husband Tim, who's finishing his dissertation in STM this year, while also working as a resident minister for campus ministry. Tim has accepted a position, tenure-track position at Villanova University in the fall, and will be departing Boston College after 4 memorable and successful years here at the Heights. So I welcome all of them here tonight. Thank you for saying yes, and I welcome you. Thank you for giving up your time to being here with us this evening as we discuss relationships. So let me begin with a prayer from Pedro Rupe, the beloved Superior General of the Society of Jesus, who called on Jesuits and the many followers to find God in all things. It's a prayer I'm sure you have heard. Nothing is more practical than finding God, than falling in love in a quite absolute, final way. What you are in love with, what seizes your imagination, will affect everything. It will decide what will get you out of bed in the morning, what you do with your evenings, how you spend your weekends, what you read, whom you know, what breaks your heart, and what amazes you with joy and gratitude. Fall in love. Stay in love. And it will decide everything. Wow. Powerful words. So let me begin by asking you, Tim, as a resident minister, mentor, former teacher, and doctoral student whose relationship with students has been the focal point of your dissertation, where have you found God in your work with students?
Well, thanks, Jack, and also thanks to Karen, and thank you all for coming. There's a lot of other things you could be doing with your time this evening, particularly the students. I know many of you have other activities and other commitments tonight, and thanks for joining the conversation. And I think a lot of it, at least for me, as an educator and a minister with the privilege of living with 700 undergrads in Edmonds Hall, a lot of it revolves around conversation. And how in those conversations we learn and we grow from each other. We're invited to see the world differently. We're invited to extend hospitality to each other. And we're invited to an ongoing process of conversion in those conversations. I think of that in the classroom, in the conversations that we have with authors and texts that can span across history, but certainly also with one another as well. Those conversations, I think, allow us to grow in our relationship with God.
Lisa, let me ask you. You work at the Taylor Elementary School in Mattapan, one of Boston's poorest neighborhoods, where you're a clinical social worker. Where do you find God in your work?
It's fresh on my mind as I just came from my school, and it seems like it's my profession, but it's also a challenge to love these little people every day that really challenge you to love. It's not always a cuddly or easy love. Sometimes they're in front of you crying and they're mad at the same time. And to kind of physically and both with my heart bend down low to them and join them in their sadness and their anger and whatever state that they come to me in, that's sort of where I feel like I need God's grace to cover my work, because as much training as I've gotten, great training at Boston College and just professional work, at the end of the day, to really fully love the kids that I work with, I have to be covered in God's grace and really reach out to them if that love in my work is going to be truly genuine and authentic and change not just the child in front of me, but change me to grow closer to God and also to become better for them and be more available to them.
Sometimes you have to deal with the difficult task of working with students who've been traumatized by violence, by abuse, by neglect. I was on the phone today with 2 graduates of Boston College who are survivors of the marathon bombings. And they were talking about how they are reconciling that issue that so thoroughly changed every aspect of their life and their desire to draw on God's strength to move forward and live a wonderful life. There are days, I'm sure, when you're challenged by your work, when what you see and what you hear in the eyes and the minds of young, innocent children is overwhelming. How do you handle it? What works for you?
In terms of those challenges,
Yes.
Sometimes praying in the hallway, I'm going upstairs and I'm literally running after a little kid, like, please stop running or don't hit your friend. And I have to stop. I've said this to a few of the retreat leaders that are in the audience that I know, and sometimes I'm just like, help. I really just have to ask God in those moments where my humanness kind of wants to take over. And the other thing that helps me is to enjoy them the way that God, Christ enjoyed the little children that gathered around him, because sometimes I think of myself as I'm this professional, but they see that you love them, and when you're not really patient with them. So to join them in the joy, because children, even the most traumatized ones, the most angry, sad ones, still want to play. So to join them in those moments, and that's really love to them, is playing with them and speaking their language. So asking for a lot of help and then just enjoying them, those are what get me through a lot of the hard days. So.
Brad Bates, you have one of the most difficult and stressful jobs on this campus.
What's that supposed to be?
Any game night, there are thousands of fans in the stands who are convinced that BC would win every game if you would just listen to them.
I've learned that BC alums are not shy about expressing their opinions.
We are not. We are not at all. So, Brad, same question to you. How do you find God in your work?
Well, it probably goes back to what you said earlier, Jack, and that is see God in all things. And a really good example, we were kind of joking about this tonight, but nothing personal. But I'd rather be at the Garden tonight because the BC hockey team would be playing in the national championship semifinals. But we're not. We got knocked out a couple weeks ago. But as you change that lens to try and view God in all things, here I am sharing a microphone with 4 Eagles. I get the opportunity to meet new people, new friends, interact with all of you, learn from all of you and the comments that are here. And so, whether you have a adverse period of time in your life or you have success, I think taking a step back, pausing, and being able to evaluate that experience and how it can be meaningful and shared with others. Tim referenced relationships. I think that's so critical, how we interact and develop those relationships. You read a prayer of love. The more we love something or someone, the more invested we are with those people and those passions of ours.
Mario, as a Jesuit, people often assume that you have an easier time in developing that relationship and having conversations with God. So I'm going to ask 2 questions of you. How have you found God in your work? And then conversely, where do you, like all of us, struggle to find God?
I think the easiest way of answering that, my work consists of sitting at my desk writing. I don't find God in that. I find it to be very frustrating, and it's on my mind because I literally just finished my thesis prior to coming over here. I was ordained a priest last June in New York, and since then I have been sitting at my desk most days writing and reading, and it's not what most people envision priests doing. Where I find God, especially here on campus, is I celebrate Mass on the Newton campus, and there are times in which I leave my desk and I complain about the fact that I have to go celebrate Mass, and it's late. It's all sorts of complaints, and by the time I get over there, I interact with the students, I celebrate Mass, I realize this is why I'm a priest. This is not only just celebrating the Eucharist, but it's being able to, as a young priest, interact with students in a way in which it's to try to be normal in front of them, to try to be a face of the church that is that smiles, that tells jokes. I still remember the first time I celebrated Mass on the Newton campus. It was still the first couple of weeks of class, and it was all freshmen, and they're still sort of, they wouldn't tell you this, but they're still sort of nervous being away from home, and I told a joke, and no one laughed. But I realized the more I interact with them, the more I'm able to do events like this on campus, the more I realize that certainly the coursework is important because that forms me into being, I think, a better priest. But what is most important, where I find God most active, is when I am interacting with students on campus and hearing their hopes and dreams and fears, and I usually respond with 2 things: God loves you, and God forgives you. And that interaction is, for me, a very holy interaction. The second part of your question, I don't know why I get the two-part question. The second part, where do I struggle? I think I think that's a good question. I think oftentimes what's difficult about the question is that people assume as a Jesuit and as a priest, I have all of the answers and that I never struggle with faith. And so in a way, even considering the question, it's like being on an island because most people don't think that's really the case. Where I would say, I point to a story from when I was recently ordained a priest. After ordination, I worked at a parish in Harlem for 2 months. And it was a wonderful parish. Nothing in my life our priesthood courses had actually prepared me to be in an inner city parish in which you have all sorts of people coming through the door. And I remember the interaction that after Mass, I was out on the street greeting people, and this homeless woman comes up to us. And you would think that we as church, after experiencing Mass, that we would be the first people to greet this woman in at the very least with a smile or in a Christian manner. It was so disappointing to see people either ignore this person or just be rude to her. And I found it actually quite overwhelming to be in Harlem as a new priest because there's so much neglect. And as someone who says, you should find God in all things, and this is a worthy endeavor for us to believe in God, I found it very dispiriting in a way to be in a part of the country, in a part of the world in which there's a lot of neglect, a lot of people who are not cared for, and that just kind of goes to my own heart of what's the point of all of this if we're not taking care of one another? What's the point of us doing this whole worship thing if the least amongst us is not being taken care of?
Sharing that. Brad, let me ask the same question of you. How have you struggled at times with your own faith? So how many of you played sports in high school, out of curiosity? Okay. I remember when I played sports at BC High prior to coming to Boston College, the chaplain would always say to us before the game, let's say a Hail Mary, and we'd say, pray dutifully, the Hail Mary. And then in the end, he'd say, Queen of Victory, and we'd yell, pray for us. And there were more times we went out and lost 35-0, 72-0, 111-0. And I remember often thinking, does the Virgin Mary not care? Or do we just stink, right? Sports has a humbling aspect to it. We give our heart to sports, and yet sometimes we lose. So Brad, in your experience as a player, as a coach, as an athletic director, and someone who deals with the sometimes volatile, highly competitive world of sports, where at times have you struggled, and how have you reconciled that struggle with your own faith?
Well, I saw a lot of hands go up when you asked a question about athletics. I think one of the great lessons that is learned through athletic participation is you fail. And sometimes it's in front of thousands of people. And you got to deal with that. And if you just dismiss it, you're not going to grow from that experience. But if you embrace it, then you have the opportunity to really learn from it and thrive in it and grow from it. So to me, that's a big part of the answer to your question. But I would also pick up on, Mauro didn't say it this way, but where my struggles come is in human tragedy, the inconsistencies across life, and to see different societies and different values and the way those are applied, and the oppressed and decisions that are made that cause greater oppression to underprivileged people or whatever it may be. That's probably where I struggle the most.
Talking about relationships. Tim and Alicia is a married couple. How did you meet, and how do you find God in your married relationship? How did you meet to begin?
We met at the Starbucks in Washington Square. And it was a February morning. And I arrived and had on corduroys, flannel, and my winter hat.
It looked like a mountain, just came off of a mountain.
I tend to shave less during the cold months. It's think it's an existential thing. And I sat down. And then I got my books unpacked, and I noticed, wow, there's this beautiful girl sitting next to me. This is interesting. And that's how it often first happened. There's a biological or organistic spontaneity that you're drawn into, and that's real. And it took me about an hour to figure out how I could say hi to her. And she broke the ice by asking me to watch her stuff as she went to the bathroom, as often happens in Starbucks and O'Neill. And when she came back, I came up with a great line, "Hey, what are you reading?"
Very original, Tim.
And we talked for an hour. And at least on my part, it felt like a very spirited talk, and we realized quickly we shared a lot of similar meanings and values about life, had some similar experiences. And she then started to pack up her books kind of abruptly. And I said, well, I really enjoyed this conversation. Here's my phone number. Here's my email. And she said, thanks. And then she left. But what I later learned was that she had stopped on Beacon Street right in front of the coffee shop and said a prayer. And at that time, she was involved in another relationship.
And that's why I said thanks. Went on my way.
And it was a relationship that we've all been in at times, which is when you know the thing is on its last run, but you're waiting for one of you to have the courage to voice it, to share it. And us meeting provided the comparison by contrast to have that courage. And her prayer wasn't, I hope I marry this guy. Her prayer was out of gratitude of now having the clarity and the courage to do what she needed to do.
And part of it was also, it was a prayer of, I'm paying attention. Like, are you trying to get my attention, God? Like, that was something right there. And I was like, I don't know what that was. I said thanks. I walked away. But I was like, okay, you've got my attention. I'm still listening. And it led to, okay, I feel like I need to act to do something.
So I immediately went across the street to the public house. Those of you that are familiar with the neighborhood, local watering hole. And I met my buddies, and we all decided, yeah, nothing's going to happen out of that. But I decided to do what any guy would do, which was I e-stalked her and found her. Was able to Facebook friend her and found out the story. And she said, I just need some time. And so we took some time apart. And she reached out to me a few months later and said, hey, I would like to have dinner together with you. Yeah. So that was our kind of
our meeting.
Our meeting, yeah, our story of coming together. And one thing that I've learned so much from the school of marriage, and one of the things that I've learned has to do with better understanding a theology of grace and just how gifted our life is. And I think that's a real challenge for us here at BC because we operate, for the most part, as if we're operating out of merit, which to a certain degree we are, but to a certain degree we're not. I mean, everyone in this room, by the fact that we're here, we all won the social cultural lottery. We weren't one of the 147 Kenyans that were massacred earlier this month, or the 43 in Mexico, in Iguala, Mexico, who were kidnapped on the way to protest, those students. And we didn't have any say in deserving this fate. And when you meet someone and you fall in love with them, you're just reminded of just the gift quality of everything that you realize, well, this is so disproportionate that I didn't merit this, I didn't deserve this. And then I think, well, yeah, so much of our life is gift, is grace. So of the many things I've learned from marriage, the excessiveness of grace in our life is one of the things that comes across crystal clear to me because of meeting Alicia.
Alicia, what's your advice for a successful relationship? All of us are looking for fulfillment, for love, for grace. What, in your view, is the key to a successful relationship?
I think that fostering, being vulnerable, your real, authentic self with someone fosters the richest relationships, and that's what I found with Tim. That when I'm in a struggle, or I feel like I have this really ugly thought or feeling, and I don't want to share it with him. It might be about my job or my family, or it might be about him, and I don't want to say it because I want to put on a good face. It makes our relationship stagnant. But when I bring that to him, like what he was saying, he extends grace and doesn't turn away and say, "Oh man, like now I want to distance myself from this person." He tends to draw nearer to me. I become more real, and that's part of the gift. I'm like, oh wow, I'm so lucky that he extends the same kind of grace that God extends to us, and it makes our relationship look more like the church, or like Christ's love for us. So.
Good. Thank you for sharing that. Mario, we're talking about relationships. You chose to become a Jesuit. I knew you here at BC, and Mario would be too humble to tell you, but he won the Amanda Houston Fellowship. He was the first African-American student to win the Fulton Debate Prize. How many of you have had a class in Gasson 307, that beautiful amphitheater room with the Greek and the Latin? You see on the wall, they literally paint the names of all the Fulton Debate Prize winners going back to 1890. And typical of the evolution of Boston College, there are Sullivans and McGillicuddies and O'Tooles. And then Mario wins it in 2003. You were an amazingly talented student, and in your senior year, you made a decision that what God was calling you to do was to pursue a vocation. So talk about that. Why did you decide to become a Jesuit upon graduation, Mario?
I think a large part of the answer is kind of a rephrasing of the question. Why did God choose me? In a large, entering religious life doesn't make any sense. I'll be the first one to tell you. It makes absolutely no sense. It didn't make sense 12 years ago, and it still doesn't make sense to me. But what did make sense back then, and what still makes sense, is I loved Jesus, and it's still it's a little weird to say that, but I did love Jesus. But my relationship with Jesus then, as it is now, it was more like it was like stumbling towards Jesus. It wasn't that I was involved in campus ministry. I studied history here, not theology. I would oftentimes be more than willing to miss Mass on Sundays if there was a good bar to go to. I'm not proud of that. But what I felt as a strong draw when I was an undergrad here was I felt, one, that I wanted to be able to do good things. I wanted to be able to do good things for other people. And that was a strong thing that had been, I went to a Jesuit high school that had been, that I had learned through 8 years of Jesuit education, was attempting to be a man for others. Now, you don't need to be a priest to be a man for others. When I was an undergrad here, I felt increasingly, for some odd reason, it was my sophomore year was the first time I began thinking about this, I remember I was at Mass at St. Mary's Chapel, and it was the first time this thought of, hey, I could be a man for others by being a Jesuit. And it scared me. The entire notion of it absolutely scared me. And I attempted to get it out of my mind. I couldn't. It was like an annoying fly that just kept on flying around and buzzing. You couldn't quite get at it, but God was speaking to me, and I didn't want to hear it, and I refused to hear it, because becoming a Jesuit meant it meant all sorts of things that I had no clue what it meant, but I didn't like any of the indicators. And I went to a Jesuit on campus who has since passed away, Father Barth, and I remember going to his office and I told him, I was scared, I was exasperated. I said, I can't do this, never telling him what the this was. I just can't do this. And at the end of about 5 minutes, he stopped me and he said, whatever this is, I don't think God is calling you to do it. And I told him my desire to become a Jesuit priest. He was the first person I ever told that. And he gave me the best piece of advice anyone ever gave me. He said, if you feel this much consternation inside you, that's not coming from God. Be a normal college student. For the next 2 years, just be a normal college student. Continue doing what you're doing, but try praying a little bit more. Go to Mass on a regular basis. So I did that. Senior year comes around, and all of a sudden I find myself I'm volunteering I'm volunteering at various places throughout the city. I've gone on service trips. I'm in spiritual direction. I go to Mass on a regular basis. And that annoying call came back to me. But it was different this time. Instead of scaring me, it was, I know. And I've called you, not since sophomore year, I've called you since I've known you in your mother's womb. And that was just, wow. That experience of just, it really is, it's an experience of falling in love with God that as a senior in college, it was hard to put the words to that experience of God saying that I've loved you and I've called you since you were born so you can do this and be this. And that in a nutshell explains it. 12 years later, however, I wouldn't explain my vocation in the same way. I was stupid when I was an undergrad. I did stupid things, and still, I stumbled into this vocation. I stumbled into becoming a Jesuit. I stumbled into becoming a priest. And that's because God loves me, not because I'm perfect. I have plenty of friends that will tell you that I'm very imperfect, and my mom will actually say that too. But I was called as I was, and that's a pretty scary thing to come to the realization of. I can say that now. Back when I was a senior, I attempted, especially with roommates, to say, especially when I was accepted to become a Jesuit. I remember coming back to my Edmonds Hall, actually, and telling my roommates this is what I was going to do. And they looked at me and smiled. And one person actually even laughed because they've known all the stupid stuff that I had done. And I told them, I said, this means that I'm just a little more holier than you all are. And in fact, I think in the last 12 years, I've learned that, if anything, I'm a sinner that's been called by Christ to become a priest, and that's the gift that Christ has given me.
All right, well, thank you for sharing that. So often, students, I gave a talk because of Karen at Agape Latte a few years ago, and I talked about my own imperfections, and so many students came up to me afterwards and said, I appreciate your opening up and sharing that, because at BC, I often feel compelled to be perfect. I think a lot of you grapple with that pressure, and as Mario has alluded, it's not perfection. God's perfect. The rest of us are imperfect, and I'm appreciative of your sharing that.
And can I add just one thing?
Please.
Whether you are a priest or that's my perspective of being a priest, you know when you are being fulfilled in your relationships. I know when I'm being fulfilled in my relationship with God and with Jesus Christ, with my brother Jesuits, and there's something inside of us that's innate as human beings that we know when it's right. And we know the things that we need to do in order to feed our souls. And so as a priest, I know the things that are necessary to feed my relationship with God, but also my brother Jesuits. And there's that line that says, "My heart is restless until it rests in God." It really, truly is about falling in love. We began this evening with the prayer about falling in love. It's finding what you are in love with, and investing yourself, throwing yourself into it, being open to surprises, and spending the rest of your life being surprised by it.
All right, let me ask you, you have always struck me since I met you in 2012 as someone who loves doing what you do. Talk about how you find joy in your work, how you find joy particularly in dealing with student athletes.
It's to me, it's reciprocal. You know, a lot of people that get into athletics and coaching talk about how they want to get into it so they can be some sort of facilitator of student development. To me, it's a two-way street. We all should be perpetual students and teachers. We're learning from one another as we hopefully are a catalyst to other people's development. And so even this kind of interaction we're growing from, there's a development component to it. I have the good fortune of being in an institution that has brilliant students. I get to work with amazing student athletes every day. But the diversity of those students and the staff and the coaches at our Boston College, each brings something unique and different that we can all grow from and learn from if you engage it and take advantage of those opportunities. You know, I'm very fortunate because I get to work with the celebrities, right? There are coaches that are in the paper, there are student athletes that are Heisman finalists, the National Player of the Year in women's ice hockey this year. But there are also so many students with gifts and talents that you never hear about or read about. And having the opportunity to develop meaningful relationships with those people is personally rewarding, and hopefully in some way I'm able to give back.
Alicia, shortly after you and Tim were married, your mother was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer, and you were uprooted from Boston to go to Texas to be with her, to help her. And she passed in May of 14.
About a year ago, yeah.
Talk about that, if you will, Alicia. I know it's intensely personal, but talk about that experience and how it perhaps challenged your faith or how it reinforced your faith, and how during her dying days your relationship with your mother might have taken on a different role, a different tone.
Well, first of all, I'll say that I can follow my mother's lead in that she saw, pancreatic cancer as giving her a platform for God's voice. You know, she couldn't do much because it just completely debilitates your body. You know, most cancers do, but particularly a terminal form of cancer like pancreatic cancer. And she could email and, sit in bed, and she could have conversations with people. And she had such a reach in sharing her story. She was an incredible woman of God, and she really wanted to share her authentic story of pain and suffering, but finding light and finding meaning, and really looking forward to joining God in eternity. And so I'm like, okay, that was hard for her, but so having an invitation to talk about it is something I try to take her lead on. And in terms of how it changed my relationship with God, I think about, some people said, oh, wow, what a sacrifice it was to go home, give up that year, be long distance from your husband. And for me, it felt like a real privilege, like that everything lined up in my life to where I could move home. A lot of people with a loved one who's dying can't just kind of put life on hold and go do something about it. So first of all, I was grateful that things lined up in my life to where I could do that, and that Tim and I walked through that together, and were able to, he was able to support me in that. And so it felt like this amazing opportunity to, a parent just gives up their whole life for you. You're everything, which is why becoming a parent sounds kind of scary. You're like, oh my goodness. But, and then for this moment in your life where you can go give back just a little bit and, wash your mom's hair when she can't do that anymore. It was such a real way to go love someone for a year who kept saying like, no, don't come back. Stay with your life. That's what your parents, they want you to keep going. But I thought, man, I could do this for just a year. And God really poured into me through that. I felt like I thought it was going to be, it was the hardest year of my life. But at the same time, I've never felt so fulfilled in my life. I love my profession and my relationships. You're talking about your relationships. That I feel like I'm lucky to have some amazing friendships and family. But this year of my life that was the hardest felt so right where I needed to be. And that was God's hand really covering me in that decision that felt scary and hard. And there were a lot of sleepless days, and watching a loved one die is really hard, but that just felt like God was sitting with me and my mom that year, and in all of these moments. And it also gave us a really unique story. You think your first year of marriage, like the honeymoon phase, and it was about how do you join together as a couple in crisis. And that was like, we were on fast forward on like marriage lessons in terms of supporting each other and joining in those dark hours. And that also, I feel like, blessed us in a way that maybe just a honeymoon year might not have. I feel like we packed in a lot of experience in that one year. It's not something I would have necessarily signed up for, sure. But it really, it gave us a chapter of our marriage that will shape us, I think, going forward a lot, and really invited Tim also into my family in a very unique way to mourn the loss of someone, and to see how our family even looks to God. It joined our families together. My mom's passing, and our own parents. I grew up in a Protestant faith, and Tim's parents are Catholic. Even seeing kind of like an understanding of these two worlds that sometimes feel like, why do you guys do it that way? And watching our parents even learn about God through each other was pretty powerful. So I think I went a lot of different places in that answer, but
it's a terrific answer. Tim, talk about that experience, because it's something we can all relate to. Love is a sacrifice. You were a newlywed, you'd met your soulmate, you got married.
Yeah.
You needed to go. You needed to support your wife as she spent 6 months in Texas. Talk about that.
Yeah, it reminds me of when I first met her at Starbucks. And one thing that I noticed immediately was Alicia lives her life out of the habit of charity. And that's qualitatively different from being nice. The world is full of nice people that are kind to each other and tolerate one another. But when you meet someone that has exchanged an economy of entitlement and just desserts and lives out of giftedness and grace, it kind of just knocks you over. It hits you. And at the time, Alicia was living with an 85-year-old woman named Helen as a way to defray her living costs while she was a graduate student. I thought, wow, something's different about her. She's not like me having drinks at the public house. She goes home on the weekends and cares for this woman. And wow, I'd like to get to know her more. But certainly seeing her care for her mother, they all had kind of signed up for shifts when her mom was no longer mobile. But when Jean was really in pain, it didn't matter who was on, she would just say, "Get me Alicia." She would just say, "Get me Alicia," because she knew that Alicia is wired to go where the hurt is and to set up camp. That's what social workers do. That's why we're a good couple, because I'm wired to talk about the love of God, and she's wired to demonstrate the thing. The lessons of vulnerability and the willingness to share yourself with one another in a real intimate way. The one other story I'll share about Jean that I just love, and it goes to this point of Alicia, how she used it as a platform to evangelize. Protestants do that. They want you to get to know Christ, and they'll tell you about it. It's lovely. She was at a Rangers game because Alicia's family are longtime season ticket holders, and they've been going for years together. That was their family outing, was to go to the Rangers game.
Even though we've never won a series.
They still go. And Jean was just well enough to make it to a Rangers game, and she made it to about the 7th inning, and she needed to retire to the first aid tent and lay down on a cot and regain some strength before she could make her way back to the van. And there was someone else there who was celebrating their 21st birthday, and they had a self-inflicted sickness. And Jean and this other young person were side by side in the cots. And of course, the first aid givers, the nurses there, they wanted to kind of ignore the kid because of his self-inflicted condition. And Jean was explicitly inviting them to consider who Jesus would care for in that situation. And that he wouldn't make that type of distinction or differentiation. Just beautiful. Jean was really embodied how hurt and struggle could be an opportunity to invite people to Christ.
Mario, are there ways in which God has surprised you?
It sounds like a cliche, but yes, almost every day. There are still times, I think, when I look at myself in a mirror with the collar on, I am somewhat surprised. God surprising me. Yeah, I think oftentimes it comes into form of God letting me know how much I don't know. And sometimes, especially when you're a graduate student, you read a lot, you work hard, and you think you know a lot, and you really don't. And I have found another story when I was in Harlem was, so we take before I was ordained a priest, we take all of these courses which prepare us to be a priest. We learn how we learn to preach, we learn how to hear confessions. But not one of those courses taught me how to, what do you do when someone comes into church right in time for communion with a 40-ounce bottle of beer and a hat on top of it. No one ever explained that one to me. And so it's a fairly big church, and it has ushers, and the ushers were going directly towards the guy because the guy was stumbling, and he was obviously intoxicated. And I tell them, and I'm confident. I'm the young priest. I'd been ordained for 2 weeks. It's still fresh. And it's like, no, I can deal with this. And the guy comes forward, and I notice the women in the front pew. These are the elders of the parish. This is an African American Catholic church. They were appalled by what I was about to do, and I looked at them, and I looked at this guy, and I had the answer. So he comes up to me and he says, "Father, I'm Catholic, and all I can do is I can smell his breath." And I said, "How about after Mass, I'll give you communion," because I didn't want to scandalize these women who were right there. And he looks at me and he said, "I came in here for Jesus." And I looked and I was like, yeah, but Jesus will still be there in about 10 minutes. He was not liking that response. The women in the front pew absolutely loved it because I was holding the fort. I was preventing this guy from receiving communion, which is a funny thing to say out loud. And it wasn't until after Mass, this guy storms off yelling. I can't say some of the stuff he yelled at me on camera. It wasn't until after Mass that there was something in the pit of my stomach that I knew was not right about this. And it just haunted me, and it stayed with me. Every single time I was attempting to pray with, get ready for my next Mass, pray with another gospel, I kept on coming back to this guy stumbling into church asking for Jesus. And what did I do? I knew better. I knew what he needed. He needed to wait so he wouldn't cause an embarrassment to the rest of the people that were present. How does God surprise me? God surprises me in ways of saying, you don't know everything, and the whole point of this enterprise of church, of this Eucharist, is for it to be an embarrassment to the world. And that I want people to come in stumbling, imperfect, however they are, to come to me. God doesn't say, come, you perfect people, but come, all who are thirsty. But it's so easy as someone who's wearing a collar to determine, okay, this person can come, but you can't. Certainly not you. And I think I've been surprised over and over again as a young priest by just exactly what God is saying to me in terms of who is called to be part of God's church. And the only way I was able to learn that was through failing and making mistakes. But I learned that through the people of God who come to me with their pain, their burdens, and instead of saying no, God says, I want you to say yes. And that, for me, has been kind of how God continues to surprise me.
Can we find God in tragedy, in setback, in loss, from your experience in life?
Say that again, I'm sorry?
Can we find God in tragedy, in setback, in loss? Can we find God, and if so, how?
Yeah, I think so, but I'm not a theologian. But for me personally, it really gets back to what you said at the beginning. Look for God in all things. I think we're almost, when we face adversity, it's an inherent process to more likely look for God. So for me, the surprises where I see God in profound ways are in the simple things. It's the sudden blooming of flowers in the spring. It's, if heaven forbid that should ever occur this spring. It's a falling star. It's, suddenly you see your wife in a restaurant or getting a cup of coffee and you get to join her and you didn't expect to have that time together. So, yes, in adversity, I think often we seek that support when we face difficult times. It's probably more profound for me in the simple moments of life that you're not expecting it.